Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, where today I want to tackle the subject of innovation. Every company should be doing it, and the rise of technology and exponential change is forcing companies to move away from the old way of doing things. Sure, the speed of change is moving at a breakneck speed now, but the reality is it's never going to move this slow again. Sounds easy, right? We all know what to do. But how do we all move away from the old way of doing things, change our thinking, change how we work, and change our corporate culture? And what about people such as myself that have left the corporate world behind? Is there anything solopreneurs, startups and freelancers, is there anything they should be doing differently to build a brand me? Is writing and independently publishing a book helpful in achieving their future goals? These are just a few topics that I want to tackle with today's guest, who is Dr. Tracy Stanley, who is a social scientist that has worked with some huge names in the world of tech, such as Cisco, where she's worked as an innovation consultant. And she's also the author of a great book called The Engagement Whisperer. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Brisbane in Australia so we can speak with Dr. Tracy Stanley. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Tracy. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil. So my name is Tracy Stanley. I'm a social scientist, which just really betrays a fascination with human behaviour and human behaviour in organisations. Through my experience in organisations, I've developed expertise across creativity, intrapreneurship, employee engagement and organisational change. And my focus is really on helping managers and organisations build great places to work where creativity flourishes and people are really engaged in what they're doing. I've been very lucky. I've lived in both Europe and Asia, in addition to my native Australia. So my apologies for the accent, where I've undertaken a range of consulting as well as senior human resource management roles. I took a break a few years back to do a PhD and managed to convert my PhD into two books, one of them on employee engagement called Engagement Whisperer, a quieter and more collaborative approach to inspiring your team. And another one on creativity, which was all about, again, written for managers, about helping your team solve complex problems with creative tools. And I co-wrote that with Barbara Wilson, and the book was called Creativity Cycling.
And we've been connected for some time now on LinkedIn.
We have, haven't we? Back from the early days, yeah.
I know, from the golden era of LinkedIn. And I remember hearing about your book, The Engagement Whisperer. It's a fantastic title, that is.
Thank you.
But I've recently read you've spent some time as an innovation consultant at Cisco. And I think most businesses beat themselves up now because they just don't innovate enough, or they want to do it, but then quickly run into problems, and that corporate culture quickly catches up with them again. I'd love to hear more how a tech company came to you and asking for your help, because it's incredibly refreshing, isn't it?
Well, I wasn't the first person at Cisco in the innovation space. In fact, I was invited to be part of quite an established team just in one corner of the organisation. It is a very, very large organisation. So it was great. I mean, I learned a lot. I think I had something to contribute, but Cisco has long recognised how important innovation is to their long-term success. And so they had established a broad range of programs and processes to help everyone innovate everywhere. And in fact, that was one of their mantras. It wasn't just about innovation being for the R&D people. They were trying to get people throughout their organisation, and they had 70,000 permanent, I think 50,000 contracting staff when I worked there. So it's a very big technology company. And I was helping them with the whole end-to-end innovation process, which starts with sort of from the idea generation process through to, the testing and the piloting, and then hopefully the scaling.
And I think the experiences you've picked up there would have been so valuable to business leaders listening. So can I ask that you tell me more about what it's like working with big tech companies like this, and how you actually advise your clients on that end-to-end innovation process, which begins, of course, from idea generation right through to realisation?
The process should always start from, there's all sorts of areas where we can innovate in, and everyone has to make a decision as to which ideas they're going to go forward with. Then the best ideas to go forward with are ideas where you address a customer's pain point. They've got some frustration with something. Because particularly from a commercial point of view, if you're able to create a solution to a pain point, you've got a greater chance of it being commercially viable and for your solution or product to be implemented successfully and scaled. So that's where the process starts from, stage one, which is really what is the big idea? And it can be either a problem or it can be an opportunity. And perhaps it could be a new technology or a new platform that's just emerged in the market. We don't have a lot of experience about how it may impact on our customers, but so we need to do a bit of sort of forward imagining as to what might that platform or process or tool look like once it's fully been realized. So that's stage one. So you can do a process by talking to individuals, but I mean, I've been most energized when I've had teams and teams working with other teams or with customers or partners in that initial process in terms of what's the idea or problem or opportunity that we're going to be working on. Once you've got the problem or the idea you're going to work on, it's then about what I call stage two, which is the dig deep. And this is really where you've got to really get out of the building. That's Steve Blank, who's big in the innovation space, who frequently utters those words, to talk to the customer to more deeply understand how they experience the problem. And it could be that you sort of try and track a day in the life of the customer to really see how this problem is impacting upon them. And at this stage, you're documenting what you're learning. You're writing down your assumptions about the problem and about how a solution the customer might be interested in purchasing the solution to the problem. But it's really important in stage two not to start leaping to the solution. You really need to understand the problem so you don't start developing something that isn't based upon good data about how the pain has been experienced. So you collect data from the customer, and you begin to write down what's going to be my success or fail criteria for these early stages in the innovation process. We explore the idea, and then we get to the solution, which is stage three. And in the lean process that's been made quite famous by Eric Ries, you develop what's called a minimum viable product or a minimum viable solution. And this is basically the thinnest product possible that you can create, so you can go out and test the idea before you waste too much time on development. And your aim is to develop a product or a service so you can get feedback from the customer. That is your objective at stage three of the process. And then stage four, that's where you get to getting ready for launch. So you've collected your feedback from the customer, you develop this MVP, you've done some assessment against your success and fail criteria. And for the launch, it's always recommended you sort of choose a pilot site or a very small market test. And again, you track what's going to be the information that will let me know if this has been a success or a failure. So you do your pilot, and then again, you look and you say, what have we learned, and is there a viable market, and can we scale this up, whether it's to other country markets or whether it's to other products. And for example, I was talking about minimum viable products. I mean, organizations like Amazon, they just started with a web page where they put up a few books, a catalog of books. And to test their idea, people would go to the web page and order a book, and then they'd ring up the distributor and they'd send it to them. So in some ways, it was a very inefficient process, but it was a good way to test the model. And of course, once they've got that pilot and got data about the pilot, of course, we've seen Amazon scale that tremendously to a whole range of other services and a whole range of other products, and indeed to a global marketplace. It's a bit the same with Airbnb. They tried to create a web page to test their product or service, and no one came to it. And then they thought, well, where are the potential customers? And as you remember, for those of you who are familiar with Airbnb, their pain was that they actually wanted to be able to hire sofas to sleep on when they went to other countries. There was no way of finding out where these couches were. So they then created a bit of code so that people who had apartments could say, I've got a coach that's available for rent, and it went through to Craigslist, which was quite a well-known platform in the US. And that was their minimum viable product that they tested. And of course, we all know the history of that was that they were able to say, well, hey, there is a market for this. And they then rolled that out beyond just a couch to sort of to rooms and to apartments. And in fact, Airbnb are now going for experiences as well as hotel bedding type accommodation. Let me do a recap. So let's talk through the 5 stages. So stage 1 is, what's the big idea? Stage 2 is the exploration stage, where you get really, really close to the customer, have lots of conversations so you really understand their pain points. And you start developing a hypothesis around what your solution will be like. And a hypothesis is academic word, but all it means is that we want to test this to see if we solve this pain point, the customer will buy the solution. And they'll buy the solution in this way. Then we build a mini model, which is a minimum viable product or a minimum viable solution, where you just aim to build a basic enough product to test it in a very, very small sample of the market and get feedback from the customers. And it's quite often at stage 3 that people say, this isn't going to go, and they abandon the idea. And for others, they pivot the idea completely in a completely different direction. Then from stage 3, we go to stage 4, which is getting ready for launch and liftoff. And depending on your product or service, you may need to develop a whole lot of processes and systems to support it. So if you exist inside a large organization, a large tech organization, you'd already have processes in place for supporting other products and services. So these just need to be accommodated or modified. But if you're in a startup, you'll have to develop all of those yourself. Then you do your launch and your liftoff, you do your pilot, you see what you learn, and then hopefully, if that all goes well, you can then scale it or roll it out either across other markets or across other product and service lines.
When it comes to companies introducing innovation strategies, one of the big problems I've often seen is actually changing corporate culture to accommodate that. But in your experience, what mistakes have you seen businesses making when engaging with their people and wanting to think differently and think creatively? What kind of mistakes do you see being made again and again?
Wow, that's such a big question.
It is.
And I mean, we all sort of would like to think, culture is such a big thing to change. You can't just tweak a few things. It's really, you require a whole systems view of an organisation so that you can build not only the processes that will support innovation, but the culture. And I guess I can talk about just a few small examples to illustrate how culture could stop innovation. For example, say, yes, we need innovation so we can survive. But if every time someone tries to do something new and it fails, they get punished, then the likelihood that they'll try something like that again is pretty small. So saying it's important and then not having processes that give people the freedom to experiment and to fail is when you've got sort of a cultural incongruence, I would say. Similarly, if people in your organisation, to all listeners, if you have an idea that impacts upon your organisation and moves way beyond the unit that you're working in, do you know where you put that idea? Do you know then where that idea, what process it will go through as it goes through the stages of innovation? And many organisations don't actually have an innovation process in place. And if they have it in place, maybe everybody doesn't know that it's there. Other missteps organisations could take, and this is probably more what managers take, is managers say, look, I really want your ideas, and they sit around and everyone generously gives their ideas about how a particular problem could be solved or, what solution they're going to be adopting. And the manager runs with their own idea. And that's a sort of a behavioural aspect that could kill innovation inside a team. So that's just a few. There's many missteps. It's a really big thing. It takes a long time to change culture. You need to have the right managers who have the right behaviours to encourage others to engage in the risky process of innovation and to understand, that there's mindsets that limit innovation, that people need time. If everyone's really, really busy, you don't have time to do things differently. You'll keep doing things the way you've always done them. And then, of course, once you get to stage 4 and stage 5, you actually need to have resources. So do you have in place processes to give them the resources to initially pilot and then to scale up?
So if we do have a business leader listening who wants to do all this, everything we've talked about and more, but their corporate culture is stagnating, where do you think they should begin to drive change within their organisation?
So as I said, the culture thing is a big thing. Yeah. But let me just pick a couple of ideas from my own experience and then from other organisations as well. John Cotter, who was one of the fathers of organisational change, says if you really want to change big, you need to create a burning platform. And that's just make a really strong case of the need for change. And this is relatively easy to do because so many organisations are having to change or they don't survive. So you've got to say, we need to innovate, we need new ideas. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. So we have to do things differently. So create the case for change. Secondly, they need to create, to either to recruit or to build leadership skills that support innovation. And there are many, many skills that support innovation. I mean, first of all, there's having this openness to innovation and to new ideas. It's providing the time and showing people how we can experiment with ideas and test them, and how we get out of the building and talk to customers, how we build minimum viable products and minimum viable services. That knowledge, that's all a skill. We then need to make sure we actually have in place this idea management process, so that if people have an idea or they want to get a problem solved, there's a way that they know how to do it. And hopefully this process not only has transparency, but the conversations that the process creates are very, very engaging for all employees. It's also very important that you have a pilot process. And this is a standard part of any sort of innovation. You need to be able to test and test in a small area and capture the learning. And then if the learning says it's not viable, to abandon the idea and then try something else. And as I said, you really need to have time and resources. If people are really, really busy, it's hard to do it, because you have to deliver business as usual, and you don't have time to invest in those products and processes that may fail, but which are important for the future. And just generally give people knowledge and skills around innovation, and help leaders to understand how their team's unique backgrounds, their socialization, their education and their background may have influenced their reluctance to participate in innovative and creative exercises.
Now, another problem that I see in many businesses is how knowledge silos are locked inside people's heads. I mean, where do you begin to leverage your organisation's knowledge and unlock that information that's locked in their heads?
Okay, I'm going to respond to this question by giving a specific example of a knowledge challenge I had in a large organisation I was working for. I started a new role, and I was told that I had to identify our best practices in sales and marketing in each of our different country markets. And once they were identified, I had to make them shareable with other country markets, and then I had to push for them to be adopted. And then I was going to be measured at the end of it on how many good practices in sales and marketing were moving between different country markets. And I remember thinking at the beginning, oh, well, this will be easy. I'll just have to identify where our best practices are. And then once I share them, everyone will think these are wonderful ideas and everyone will adopt them. It proved to be a lot harder than my initial naive self thought. The first challenge was identifying the knowledge. Who had the knowledge? Now, we were fairly sure that the country managers of each of, and we had many, we were operating. So I was working for Amadeus, we were working, and we still are working, we're working in 190 countries. We knew that the heads of the countries and the head of sales and marketing would know about their best practices. However, for many of them, they were practices that they did and hadn't actually formally written them down anywhere, so they hadn't formalized them. They may have been using tools and templates that could have been a simple checklist, or it could have been an Excel spreadsheet. They hadn't formalized those either. So this also had a 5-step process. And the first step was identifying them and helping those countries to document them. And I had a small team of students, and we documented them at that time in Word. We created a case study, which was a very thick document, but described the practice in detail. And then because we know people had a small attention span, we did a 1-page summary of the best practice. People also had a bit of trouble with the language in terms of, is this valuable knowledge or not? Is this a good or best practice? And so we had to help them to say, well, if it's a practice that you've used that has clearly contributed to your sales or to your marketing success, then we want to know about it because we think it will have value for other countries. So we identified it, then we documented it. We had multiple ways of distributing it. We had our own intranet platform. We printed out at that time copies of all the case studies and the 1-page summary sheets. We also put them on CDs and we made videos. And we then importantly had a forum, a best practice sharing forum, where all the country managers who came together twice a year could come and in front of their peers, they could get up and they could say, this is what we've been doing. this is what we learnt, and this is what we achieved. And at this forum, we actually then we created a process to encourage them to adopt that knowledge by asking everybody to give a response to every practice that was presented. So typically there'd be sort of 10 to 15 practices presented at a forum. And for every idea, sales and marketing idea, the country manager had to say, this is a great practice and I'm going to adopt it. Or they had to say, this is a great practice, but I need to tweak it so it's more culturally appropriate. Or this is an idea and I don't think it'll work in my market and I reject it. And they would give their reasons. And we'd note down the reasons. They'd all finish up and have a nice time. We'd vote on the best practice forum for the event. And then 6 months later, they'd come back and they were asked to report on how they'd gone for all those practices they said that they would adopt or adapt. And we were there all the time helping them to, describe their practice in as much detail as they could. We would remind them that we wanted them to come back and to share their practice. And then at the second one, we would actually give an award to that country manager who had most frequently adopted ideas from the other markets. So that's just one example. And it's a lot harder work than you think it is, particularly when the knowledge is complex and it's strategic and we know it resides in people's heads. And for that sort of really complex knowledge, you really need to get people sharing the knowledge in a face-to-face forum. I mean, we did the best that we could by writing case studies, but even then we know that if a country manager was really interested in a particular sales practice, they'd always ring up that country manager to say, can you tell me more about it, even though we thought we'd given them all the details in the documentation.
Man, I'm getting flashbacks from my corporate past there listening to that. But what about people such as myself that have left that corporate world behind? I mean, is there anything solopreneurs, startup founders, freelancers, is there anything that they should be doing to build that brand me? And do you think writing and independently publishing a book, for example, do you think that's helpful in doing that?
I think it's really helpful and I think it's really important. And there's two key benefits for writing a book. So one is, as I've just described, often we have a lot of knowledge. We've been doing things and we've been learning and we haven't actually documented down what we've learned from it. And the process of writing a book really organises all the stuff that's in your head. And if you get an editor or a book coach to work with you, you can actually get it out there and write it in a way that's really appropriate for the person who you've written it for your target audience. So it helps you. I mean, I've written 2 nonfiction books and I love, even though the process was long and there were frustrations at each stage of the writing and the editing and the publishing process, I was really proud that I was able to show my knowledge through a book. So it helped me to get the knowledge out there, and then I was able to start building my brand. And of course, the internet gives us access to this fabulous and huge global marketplace. And when you've got codified knowledge, and it could just be a blog as well as a book, it's able to be sent out to your potential marketplace, or more importantly, you're in a better position to be discovered. And having a book actually does help to increase your discoverability through the power of search engine power when people start looking for experts in a particular area.
And as for everyone listening, I think everybody's guilty of chasing happiness at some stage in their life. But do you have any thoughts on that particular trend at the moment? Because it seems to be exacerbated now, especially with the pressures of social media and things like that Instagram life that doesn't actually exist. I mean, is there anything that you've noticed from that?
Yes, you're right. It's been happiness and well-being. It's been a part of our conversation for quite some time now. And I think ourselves, we all... we should stop and reflect upon what makes us happy, because I think we only live for 30,000 days. And
is that right? 30,000 days?
I think it's something like 30,000 days. I think that was my calculation, 365 times 83. I think that's what it came up with. And it's like, how do we want to spend our time, and what do we want it to say on our gravestone? And obviously early in our careers, we have student debts we've got to repay, we've got mortgages. And so in some ways we could think, it's a little bit precious to think about what makes me happy in terms of work, because I have to earn some money, and I have so much sympathy for that. But I think it's useful for all of us to say, well, if I actually didn't have to meet tight financial obligations, how would I like to be spending my time? And I would encourage people to think about, their best day at work when they so loved what they were doing, what was happening, and start reflecting about, whether it's the nature of the work, the nature of the projects, the nature of the people you're working with, or maybe you really love what you were doing on that best day at work because you were contributing to something that really aligned with your own personal values. I think it's important we have those thoughts. We take time out. And of course, as we get older and we have our life circumstances change, what's important to us changes a little bit as well. But I do that. I think, what I want to achieve today, and I have lots of these reflection points. And I think I'd encourage people to do that as well. Because I said we only have these 30,000 days. And, we have so many more choices with the internet. There's increasingly, more and more independent solopreneur opportunities available. And if leading that sort of life is what you want, then, the world is full of opportunity.
And what about technology? What excites you about the role of tech in our lives now? I mean, we do hear a lot of the horror stories and the dark side of tech, but what excites you about technology in our lives?
I think it's the opportunity, as I've just said. The nature of work is changing. I think in 10 years' time, people will think how old-fashioned it was that so many people had to front up every day to an office. And I know that increasingly there are more and more organisations who are happy for you to work from anywhere, any place, and at any time. So I think AI is going to take away some of the boring jobs, and new roles are going to be emerging. And I think people need to think for a role beyond their local geographic area. And it's about finding those opportunities, and technology gives us access to this information on all sorts of roles within a global marketplace. And even though our artificial intelligence may be taking away some of the boring jobs, the skills that are going to be really, really important are things like creativity. Creativity and problem solving. There'll always be a need for those. So if you focus on building your skills in those areas would be my suggestion as technology continues to change the way work is done.
And what about yourself, Tracy? Is there anything else you can share with us today about the road ahead and what opportunities you're going to be trying to secure in the future?
I have so many things on my to-do list that I really don't. I'm working on my next book on change management, and it gives me opportunity to go out and talk to experts in the field and to learn from them. So I actually love the research process. I'm looking to convert my first 2 books into to online courses, again, as another way of codifying my knowledge and getting it out there to a much broader global marketplace. And those are just a few of the things. I've got a whole lot of other ideas as well. Again, taking advantage of the opportunities available to us through the World Wide Web.
And for anyone listening that wants to find out more information, or maybe even how you can help them or their business, can you just remind them of where they can find you online and maybe even contact you if they've got any additional questions?
I would love to hear from your listeners. Thank you very much, Neil. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there under Dr. Tracy Stanley, Tracy Stanley. I'm on Twitter at TJStanley64. And I've got some webpage, which is engagementwhisperer.com. And my email address, if you'd like to contact me directly, is Tracy, Tracy, at tjstanley.com.
Well, something you said a moment ago really struck a chord with me when you said people need to start thinking about a role beyond their geographical region. I think that's so true.
Absolutely.
Now. And I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it actually brings people together. And we've been connected for 5 years now on opposite sides of the world. And tech has enabled us to speak and share this conversation with, I think, over 165 countries we've got listeners now. So but maybe, I think by your calculations, I've got just under 14,000 days left on this planet. So hopefully I'll get to meet you one day too. But thanks for joining me today.
I'd love being a part of this conversation, Neil. Thank you.
There were so many valuable takeaways in today's conversation. Building processes and, importantly, a culture which fosters creativity and innovation everywhere is crucial for businesses now, and whether that be a huge corporation, brand, startup, or even a solopreneur. But equally important is not understanding the environmental, culture and cultural and individual factors that impact on a person's inclination to think differently. That will impact on the success of any innovation initiative too. And that's something that people often forget. But the line that will really stick with me from my conversation with Tracy today was, when thinking about future job roles, we need to start thinking beyond our geographical location. And maybe, just maybe, that future mindset might wake people up about the Brexit. Might just wake a few people up about the Brexit fiasco over here in the UK. But I don't like mentioning the B word on here because that is an argument for another day. But whether you are a business leader, a startup founder, a freelancer or a solopreneur, I want to hear about your experiences with innovation and thinking differently and the kind of impacts that has had on your business. And whether that be good or bad, I want to hear it all. I'm here in the UK. Dr. Tracy Stanley spoke to us today all the way in Australia. I know you are listening scattered all over the world. And I want you all to share your experiences with me right here on this show. And there are a number of ways you can do that. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can get me on Twitter @NeilCHughes. You can also get me on Instagram @NeilCHughes too. And if you go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, there are 900 interviews, including all the links that Tracy mentioned there and how you can get hold of her. So if you do want that information, pop over to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. But it's time for me to leave you, I'm afraid, everybody. Oh, have no fear. I'm going to return again tomorrow. We'll get to grips with another topic of how technology is transforming multiple industries and indeed our lives. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.